Once upon a time, a group of scientists in the Ares 3 mission conducts research on planet Mars. They build a hab or base in an area known as Acidalia Planitia. The scientists include Melissa as the commander, Rick as the pilot, Beth as the system operator, Chris as the flight surgeon, Alex as navigator and chemist, and Mark as the botanist. While they collect samples, a big storm suddenly approaches. Commander Melissa orders the crew to leave the base and get to the spacecraft. The storm is very close. Mark asks them to wait because it is too dangerous to walk outside, but the commander insists. While walking in the middle of the storm, an object hits Mark and throws him away. Rick reports an oxygen leak in Mark's suit, and his signal is lost. There is nothing they can do because the suit can only protect him for less than a minute. Also, if they do not get on the spacecraft soon, the storm may destroy it at any time. In the end, the Ares 3 crew leaves planet Mars without Mark. After the incident, NASA immediately holds a press conference and announces that the Ares 3 mission must return early because of the storm, and that Mark is declared dead. They plan a memorial service and make sure his sacrifice is not in vain. Back on Mars, after the storm clears, Mark is still alive. The sound of a low oxygen warning wakes him up. A piece of metal sticks into his stomach, but it actually slows down the oxygen leak. Mark walks to the hab, which survives the storm, and treats his wound. The standard procedure for astronauts during missions is to record daily logs. That day is Sol 19 of their mission on Mars. A Sol is a Martian day, which equals 25.6 hours. For one orbit around the Sun, Mars takes 687 days. In his video log, Mark says that the main antenna is broken, the communication system is down, and there is no way to contact NASA. Even if he could, the next mission arrives in 4 years, while his crew is already on their way back to Earth, not knowing that he is still alive. No one knows if another storm will destroy the base or if the oxygen supply will fail. And if that happens, he will not survive. The next day, Mark starts counting the remaining food supplies. NASA gives them enough food for a 31-day mission. But to be safe, they prepare food for 68 days for 6 people. If it is only for him, it is enough for 300 to 400 souls with careful use. What he needs to do is find a way to grow enough food for the next 3 years. That way, when the Ares 4 mission arrives, he can return to Earth with them. Fortunately, he is a botanist. Mark uses the potato supplies to grow food, so he can increase his food stock. Without wasting time, Mark immediately starts his survival project. First, he repairs the solar cells that provide power to the hab. Then he collects human waste from the septic tank. When he defecates, the waste is vacuumed immediately to avoid excess pollution. Mark builds a farming medium inside the hab using Martian soil and plants potatoes using his own waste as fertilizer. The next problem is water. Mark creates water using hydrazine from the MDV, Mars Descent Vehicle, mixing it with oxygen and burning it. The first experiment fails and explodes, but the second one works, and water begins to drip and moisten the area. Mark's efforts pay off because on Sol 54, the potato plants begin to grow. Meanwhile, on Earth, Vincent Kapoor, NASA's director of Mars missions, talks to Teddy, the administrator of NASA. Teddy suggests retrieving Mark's body to show the world that he really is dead. But Teddy refuses, saying the next mission is still far away. Vincent says that protecting NASA's reputation is also important. Mindy, a satellite planner in mission control, receives a message from Vincent. Through a satellite orbiting Mars, Vincent asks Mindy to compare images from Sol 18 and Sol 54.
Yes, it's an emergency.
NASA's top officials gather. They see that the position of the rover changes between Sol 18 and Sol 54, which shows there is activity at the hab. This means Mark might still be alive. To confirm it, they need to talk to the Ares 3 crew about the rover's position. However, Teddy forbids informing the Ares 3 crew because they are on their way back to Earth. He says they will lose focus and feel guilty if they know Mark is still alive and they left him alone on that planet. By law, NASA must confirm the discovery within 24 hours. If Mark is still alive, he might be starving due to limited food and water. The press conference also raises many questions. On Sol 70, Mark starts thinking about traveling to the Ares 4 landing site, which is 3,200 kilometers away. The problem is, the rover can only travel 35 kilometers per battery charge, and the trip takes 50 days to complete. Since it is impossible to reach it now, he is forced to survive inside the small rover. The next day, Mark tests how far the rover can travel after doubling the batteries. His activity is recorded by NASA's satellite. They are more convinced that Mark is still alive. The satellite captures that the rover moves toward the Ares 4 landing site, then returns to the HAB. At least NASA knows that Mark plans to go there. Teddy asks Bruce, the director of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, to prepare a food supply rocket. It normally takes 6 months, but Teddy asks for it to be ready in 3. Mitch, the Hermes flight director, asks that they inform the Ares 3 crew, and they agree to tell them after the rescue plan is ready. On Sol 79, Mark finally harvests the potatoes. He eats the large ones and replants the small ones. Mark sees something on the map and decides to go to that location. NASA sees the route change through satellite images and realizes that Mark is heading to the Mars Pathfinder site, a rover that landed in Ares Vallis in 1997. Mark finds the Pathfinder, brings it to the HAB, and turns it on. After pointing the antenna toward Earth, the Pathfinder on Earth responds. Mark and Mission Control exchange images. Pathfinder has a camera that can show objects in front of it, and Mark sends a message. "Are you receiving me?" The camera responds by rotating, "Yes." Since this tool is slow, communication requires patience. To speed up the process, Mark uses the hexadecimal system, which is commonly used in programming because it consists of the numbers 0 to 9 and letters A to F. Mark reads a simulation in Mission Control and translates it into a sentence. Mark responds by creating an image with text that contains information that he is still alive and does not blame the crew if they think he is dead. Communicating using hexadecimal, of course, takes a lot of time. Then NASA sends instructions on how to hack the rover to connect it with the Pathfinder so they can communicate through the computer. Once the frequencies are synchronized, they begin exchanging messages directly. Vincent types a message saying that he has known about Mark's activity since Sol 54. They are now working on a plan to rescue him and will send food supplies until Ares 4 arrives to pick him up. Mark is very happy to hear this and asks about the Ares 3 crew. Vincent replies that the crew has not been informed about his condition so they can stay focused on their return trip to Earth. Mark gets angry when he hears this and swears. Vincent asks Mark to watch his language, but Mark gets even angrier.
I'm sure he didn't mean what he said.
4 months after leaving Mars, the Ares 3 crew is finally told that Mark is still alive. Mitch tells them directly that they've known about it for 2 months and that Mark is healthy. The commander feels very guilty for having left him behind. On Sol 134, as usual, Mark performs equipment maintenance before resting. Suddenly, an air leak causes the HAB to explode. His potato farm is destroyed and the water supply spills. Technically, Mark can no longer grow potatoes. Fortunately, he still has food supplies for 609 sols. However, the next food delivery won't arrive until Sol H-68. The launch must be accelerated. NASA opens a frequency channel so Mark can communicate with the Ares 3 crew. He tells them how he has survived and says he doesn't blame them. After that, he returns to the HAB to patch every hole and restore the air pressure. Meanwhile, in a laboratory, an astrodynamics expert named Rich is asked to calculate the distance from Earth to Mars. He says it is currently the farthest distance and not an ideal time for a launch. On Mars, Mark begins to ration his food. When the Iris probe rocket launches, everyone cheers, but once it leaves orbit, the rocket malfunctions and explodes. The incident is immediately reported to Mark. He sends a message to the Ares 3 commander to deliver his final words to his family. He says he is fine with dying on Mars if that is his fate. The explosion also draws attention from CNSA, the China National Space Administration. A scientist named Zhu Tao says they have a rocket called Taiyang Shen that can deliver supplies to Mars, so Mark can survive for another 2 years. For humanitarian reasons, CNSA offers help to NASA. Meanwhile, Rich creates a trajectory simulation for the Hermes spacecraft using NASA's supercomputer. He goes to NASA headquarters for a secret meeting. He proposes that the Hermes, which carries the Ares 3 crew, can return to Mars to rescue Mark. When Hermes reaches Earth's orbit, Taiyang Shen can deliver additional supplies to Hermes. Then, Hermes uses Earth's gravity to speed up and head back to Mars. Once it reaches Mars orbit, the crew can pause briefly, and Mark can launch using the Ares 4 MAV to meet them in orbit and return together. Before the Ares 4 mission, NASA already sends the necessary equipment, including the MAV, Mars Ascent Vehicle, which launches from Mars to orbit and connects with the spacecraft returning to Earth. Mark can use it to fly into Mars orbit and reach Hermes. However, Teddy disagrees. He argues that Hermes should return to Earth as planned because extending the mission risks the crew's safety. Vincent replies that Hermes is built for long-term missions and is still reliable. Mitch says the Ares 3 crew should be the ones to decide, but Teddy insists that Hermes returns and the supplies are sent by CNSA's rocket.
You goddamn coward.
Secretly, Mitch sends the rescue simulation to the Ares 3 crew. They study it and think it is a brilliant idea. Even though NASA rejects the plan, the crew discusses it and agrees to return to Mars. They face the risk of an additional 533 days in space and possibly ending their careers at NASA. NASA's control center notices that Hermes changes its course, but no one can stop the crew. NASA begins to prepare the needed supplies. Teddy and other NASA officials visit CNSA headquarters in China. They accept CNSA's help under one condition: a Chinese astronaut must join the next Mars mission. After learning that Hermes will pick him up, Mark still has 200 souls to prepare for his journey to Ares 4. He starts organizing supplies, modifies the rover to carry more oxygen, brings all life support equipment including solar panels to charge the rover's batteries, and plans his departure time to synchronize with Hermes' arrival. Meanwhile, NASA and CNSA prepare the supplies needed by the Ares 3 crew to retrieve Mark and then launch them. On Sol 227, Hermes reaches Earth's orbit and receives supplies from CNSA, then continues its journey. On Sol 461, Mark begins his journey. Every 4 hours, he drives, then stops and charges the rover with solar panels for 16 hours. He sleeps alone in a different place every night and feels very lonely. On Sol 538, Mark arrives at the Ares 4 MAV site. Total journey, 77 souls. Back at NASA, Bruce says the MAV cannot launch directly because its thrust is limited. Mark is told to discard unnecessary items, including the door and the top cover, replacing them with a tarp. The weight reduction helps the MAV lift off better in Mars's thin atmosphere. The Hermes crew simulates the interception. They cannot get too close to Mars due to fuel limits. They must avoid all mistakes if they want to return safely. On Sol 561, it is time for Mark to launch because Hermes is already in Mars orbit. After saying goodbye to the rover that saves his life, Mark boards the MAV. The rescue mission is broadcast worldwide. Hermes then contacts Mark to get ready because the MAV will be remotely controlled by Rick. But during the journey, the tarp comes off, the pressure increases drastically, and Mark faints. Once in orbit, the MAV is too low, 68 kilometers away from Hermes. Hermes lowers its altitude slightly, using some reserved fuel. The distance decreases, but the speed difference increases to 42 meters per second, too fast to catch Mark. Soon, Mark regains consciousness and asks if something is wrong. He suggests puncturing his suit and using the escaping air as a thruster. Commander Melissa forbids it, saying it is too dangerous. She cuts communication with Mission Control and comes up with a risky idea: blow off a small part of the ship to slow down. It only requires a small explosion at the tip and won't cause much damage. Using available materials, they create a small bomb and detonate it. The speed matches, but the distance remains 260 meters. Commander Melissa decides to leave the ship to reach Mark. The tether is too short, so Mark takes a bold risk and punctures his suit to fly toward Melissa. It works. They grab each other, and Mark is rescued. After entering Hermes, the commander informs Mission Control that they have succeeded. A year later, the Ares 3 crew returns to Earth. Mark becomes famous and starts teaching future astronauts. 5 years later, the Ares 5 mission launches. NASA and CNSA fully cooperate for the next journey.